Welcome to Art Beat, Canada's Art Pulse. I'm your host, Katie. In today's episode, we explore the thought-provoking world of Stephanie Haynes, a ceramic artist whose journey from Alberta to New York has influenced their approach to art and teaching. Stephanie employs the female body as a canvas of defiance, challenging societal norms with elements of the grotesque and uncanny. Their work merges myth with reality, urging us to reconsider notions of femininity and power through their intuitive engagement with clay. Stephanie discusses how movement, identity, and the interplay of bodies shape their creations and reflects on the contrast between their Canadian roots and the global art scene. Join us as we navigate the boundary-pushing spaces of Stephanie Haynes' art, redefining gender and power. Stephanie, hi. How are you doing today?
I'm well. It's sunny out.
So, Stephanie, as I understand, born in Alberta, you are now in New York as an assistant professor in ceramic art at New York College of Ceramics at the Alfred University. You teach ceramic sculpture. So I'm wondering if we can have you reflect on your journey from Alberta to New York and tell us how this new environment has shaped your art and approach to teaching.
So that's a long, journey. I left Alberta in 2015 to pursue my MFA at Rhode Island School of Design, where I graduated in 2017. And I really think that's where a lot of my artistic journey kind of started, notwithstanding what happened in Alberta. That's when my work really changed. That's where I really found, I think, my aesthetic style of kind of like the morphing, merging bodies. And then it really comes from, I think, growing up in Alberta, grew up in the oil boom of the early 2000s. And it was just a really odd kind of growing up of, I think, a highly, patriarchal society and ideas of wealth and just not really attainable goals. Thinking back to you were a failure if you didn't have a house by the time you were 25 and making a lot of money just because of what, was pressured on the youth in that time, I guess. And I think that's when I became a pretty staunch feminist, is kind of growing up in a misogynist culture. It's where a lot of my reflection on how I kind of came to be. And then I took those early experiences and brought it to grad school. And I've always had a real innate interest into movement, time, place, and how identity is formed and how we come into this world because of those experiences. And I moved to California State, Long Beach, and I did a residency there. And I further explored my current practice there. And because they had really large kilns, I was able to pursue more scaling my work further and further. I got a job as a full-time lecturer at University of Washington, where I grew my academic practice a little bit more with teaching and learning to kind of pedagogy with teaching more so and how to reach students. Because sometimes as an artist, you feel like you're not doing enough, you're not reaching enough people, you're not kind of questioning what it's all for sometimes, especially if your work isn't selling or reaching a larger audience. So I feel like through teaching, that's how I hopefully am changing minds and changing trajectories of people, because I was teaching a lot of non-majors there. So it was people in business, people in medical and medicine, psychology, which was really great for me because they brought a lot of depth and conceptual depth to their work, which was really great. I've had some people reach out later and say how much the course made them think about themselves and think about how society forms their personal identities and changing majors because of the class. And they weren't pursuing art, but it still meant a lot to me. And last year I got a tenure track professor position at New York State College of Ceramics in upstate New York. It's about 7 hours north of New York City. So it is in a very rural setting, very, very small town. 2 universities or 2 colleges make up the town. So it's a very young population, which is interesting. And in particular at Alfred University, a lot of the students aren't from the area. They come from all over the world to study at the New York State College of Ceramics because it has a reputation of being one of the best to study ceramics at. So we get a lot of really talented students. So I think now I'm trying to cultivate more conceptual growth in students, and like also again they have really large kilns here. So again, how it's growing into my practice is, again, I'm growing in scale, growing in ambition, trying to go bigger. And also the grad students are really inspiring to be around.
How do you balance the dual roles of being an artist and an educator? And what synergies do you find between them?
Well, to balance is really difficult. It has taken me years to try to balance work, life, and creating art, because I think I could just become overly consumed with art making, like taking up my weekends to do that. But I really have to carve out days for myself in the week. It's really great here that we teach like either at the front of the week or the back of the week. So then I have at least 2 days to work fully on my practice. And then, if I have a show coming up or something that I need to complete, because ceramics is a very time-based material and medium that sometimes you can't wait and you just have to finish it. It is a big balance that I try to go crazy doing, but I think I'm getting better at it. And also the synergy with the students is that I usually have like 2 full days with them, talking with them, like getting to know them. It's a very mentorship heavy program. So I deal with students a lot one-on-one. And then I'm teaching a figure class at the moment. Basically, we're really focusing on technical ability of sculpting faces, heads, body parts, and then it's going to get into thinking about more internal places of the body or internal expressions of the body, and also deconstructing the gaze, the male gaze, and talking about how showing the body isn't inherently a political act, and how you represent the body is projecting something. Everything is saying something. So getting them to think about that is really important to me, and how they're kind of showing bodies in space and what kind of place they're taking up in society, and just what it says about you and the society that we're living in right now.
So referencing femininity and feminism, how do you feel your art contributes to the conversation around femininity and strength in today's context?
I use the female body as a site of resistance because it has been a site of possession, particularly within the male gaze of culture. Starting of my thinking about this was John Berger's ways of seeing, and women have been seen throughout art in general, and that a lot of the women that were depicted, their orifices were sealed. There was no like marginal matter transgressing the boundaries. It was very tight, polished, smooth, perfect, representing how women were meant to be seen. I think a lot of my work kind of gets into the grotesque, which to me is like challenging societal norms. The grotesque body for me is extended, protruding, fragmented, and sometimes incomplete. It is open, excessive, and I think a lot of my work does, which has an emphasis on fragmentation in a way to kind of transgress those boundaries of the body, alluding to the transformation of the white patriarchal norm, because a lot of what we were seeing in media today and also in art was depicting whiteness. So a lot of my work is trying to challenge that, but using the theory of mimesis, which is kind of using something that is familiar within culture and then reflecting it, making it a little bit odd so that you understand that it's not the natural order. So it's like meant to get you to question what you're looking at. I'm also thinking about the female body as a site of containment, regulation. So a lot of my work is about opening. If it says opening the body, is kind of gets into Julia Kristeva's powers of horror, which is to open a body, is to disfigure it, to destroy all of its harmony. So I am thinking about, abject as it is ejected beyond the scope, the possible, the thinkable. So, and I guess that kind of gets into my interest in queerness and that as a reclamation. And also, in particular, with the grotesque body, it hits you in a different way. And thinking about female female body, monstrosity, as a form of power, because it is usually the site of, if you're looking at the Medusa, I use that as an example a lot of the time because it's kind of taking from Greek mythology and culture to understand the world today. Basically, it's a fear of female power and the female gaze. So a lot of the time, usually monstrosity is a threat because it is female power, and usually through patriarchal structures, there's always like a way to diminish and quell female power. And a lot of my work, it's like unabashedly grotesque to kind of talk about this fear of female power and anti-female messages that were in Greek myth. So a lot of the time I do use bits of the past and it's projected into the future to kind of talk about this anti-femaleness throughout history. Yeah, and a lot of the mimicry of the ideal in my work, because I do work with reclining nudes a lot, and then it's kind of morphing into something more alien, unimaginable, to kind of project this mimicry of correct femininity, to make it seen and visible, to talk about creativity, destruction.
How do Greek mythology and cultural perceptions shape the narrative of female power in your work?
Because of a lot of my travels in Italy, I was really struck by the image of the Medusa a lot because it's everywhere. And that's where I really first started thinking about the Medusa in Greek mythology and how, like, a lot of those stories are projected through time and they really haven't changed much. If you watch television, look at ads, it really is just a regurgitation of that culture, like how we see ourselves, how those lessons that were meant to be taught through Greek mythology, they really haven't changed much. I guess I was really interested in the Medusa because of Perseus kills Medusa and how that kind of reflects to the taming and the demand to tame the female body to make it passive, removing its power, and so that it returns it to the male gaze. Essentially, Perseus removes the monstrous threat of woman's direct stare, and now he's able to look at her without her looking back at him. There's a theorist, Amy Adler, who talks about this as an idea of pornographic film, using those kind of mirroring effects to tame the body. So thinking about the nude and the naked, the nude is a body that is just as formal if it was clothed or not clothed. But the naked is something that I'm interested in, is to kind of show the body as it is, show a body in its aggressive nakedness, to kind of challenge that fear, challenge that narrative of the passive body.
In blending myth with reality, what do you discover about contemporary views on femininity and power?
After reading Sadie Doyle's Dead Blondes and Bad Mothers, I've been thinking a lot about how she ties, in general, womanhood to monstrosity through horror films in a way that kind of usually a lot of horror films are portrayed at the moment of transition. So at adolescence, they're transforming into women, which means monstrosity. In a way, we all are kind of depicted as monsters and need to be. It's just like kind of depicting our otherness, going into our full otherness of becoming a woman into, I guess, full womanhood. So it's really critiquing, how women are viewed in horror films and how that could be tied to myth and culture today. But I guess a lot of my work comes from like this fragmentation and movement and flux and distortion that happens. Basically, I kind of tie it to the fragmentations of women through time. So there's always fragmentation, misrecognitions that we're conditioned to emulate and reproduce. One woman becomes another woman in another woman, and then it kind of becomes like this monstrosity, if you will, of how it compounds through time and how we're the multiplicity of experience.
So, Stephanie, what themes are you currently drawn to explore, and how do they manifest in your material choices?
Well, firstly, I'm really drawn to clay because of its intensely intimateness. It's an intimate material. It shows touch. It's one of the most ancient mediums for human expressions. For me, it's an extension of our body, because we are made, and it is made of the earth. So I'm really drawn to play because it activates a visceralness for me of pure intuition. And it gives me the freedom to navigate an internalness, internal reality. That's what I really love about it. I am also pushing scale in my newest work, which is in clay. It's a little bit difficult to have a piece hollow, freestanding, without an armature, standing on ankles. So it's a really difficult process that really draws me to it because it has an intense, you can have a lot of failure with it, but I learned so much in those failures and how I can grow from them and kind of move through it. In regards to my newest work, I'm really interested in glazed luster. It was developed in the Middle East over 1,000 years ago. So a lot of my work is taking like ancient materials of clay and glaze to talk about more contemporary subjects. So something that kind of has reemerged in my work over and over again is the idea of the mirror. Glazed luster does is it literally creates my work. It puts it as a mirror. It becomes a mirror. And so that when the viewer looks at themselves in the sculptures, they're then implicated into the work. So their reflections kind of replicate the distortions of what's happening in the work, the exaggeration, the dysmorphic view of women in our culture, also implicating the viewer in the process. I am thinking about a lot of theory within my work. So Luce Irigaray is a big influence in my work, and she discusses the mirror in various forms of talking about the flat mirror, which is faithful and polished. So it's empty of altering reflections, in a way confirming the male order of the singular. So with my work, it's more of a convex mirror. It's distorting. It's kind of creating the carnivalesque mirror so that we're aware of this distortion that happens in society. The newest work that I'm working on, I'm calling it celestial bodies, the unseen divine bodies tied to queerness. So the work is godly, alien, unfathomable, because I'm tying ideas to reclining nudes in the gaze, but I'm using it in a subversive way. So it's anything out of the patriarchal norm is seen as queer and alien. So I want to speak to the sense of mystery in the work and also the heart of being. So we don't actually know what it is to be. So a lot of my work is intense internal investigations to understand myself and the world around me. These bodies are merging, they're hybridized, but also has a lot of violence happening to it, which makes it open to the future and of becoming. So I've had some questions of like, why are hands coming out of the body or vaginal openings? And a lot of the times I'm thinking about, it's not even I'm thinking about it, it's more of a unconsciousness that comes through me that I allow. It's almost like a spiritual aspect of the work of like allowing myself to be open to becoming. And clay, as I'm saying, is like I have to work with the material because when it's moving one way, I have to respond to it. So I think that's where like a dance happens when I'm making the work. So then it kind of becomes more alien or kind of working into the uncanny, I guess, of something that's familiar but different. I want to kind of talk about their undoing and their becoming at the same time. I am thinking that my work is going to push more into abstraction because I feel like there's like an openness in that space that I could talk about or flow through the unconsciousness. And then a lot of the times I make a piece of work and then I have to think on it. I do read a lot. I do have a lot of theoretical analysis, but it comes out first. I make the work and then I find the theory. And it's because I'm doing all this reading and writing that, you know, it inevitably comes out in my work. But when I'm making it, I'm usually shocked or like really struck by how odd it is or how alien it is to me. And I think that's when I lose that, I feel like I'll be stagnating as an artist. I'm always trying to find the unknown or the unknowable. I think that's why like alien, angel, a lot of people see those things in my work. It's not as if I'm trying to depict it. It just kind of moves through me and I make what I feel is right. I'm thinking about bleeding into nothingness, trying to find what it is to be. I don't really know. So it's a constant search.
So do you think ahead of time about a particular piece that you've been conceptualizing, or do you just start molding clay and just see what comes from inside?
I usually don't really have an idea. I don't sketch. I don't have a direct idea. I usually sculpt from touching or like tracing my own body, the base of it. And then I've been using these scaling calipers that I can like upscale things to make them extra large. And I primarily work from highly intuitive practice. So I start with, I don't know how many, like 2 feet, and then I will maybe add to that and kind of imagine how it can change. Usually I'm very much bound to the constrictions of kiln size, so I am thinking about that a lot. And so I usually make a board that, okay, this is your space that you get to work in, and then I usually will start at the feet with all things that I make. It's through coil methods, so I roll like these little sausage-like coils. I kind of work from, they're hollow, so I'm kind of working like a 3D printer. I usually get people that are like, well, you need to imagine the thing before you make it in a way, but that's not how I work. I kind of, as I was saying, I really look at how it's evolving, and if I'm like, oh, that might be nice to add another foot there, that could be nice to kind of have like the merging of bodies, the splitting, the motion of the in-between space, of catching a moment unseen, of, mitosis, of like cells splitting and becoming something new. I am thinking about all of these things, but it just I kind of go with what is looking right to me, what feels right. And sometimes it doesn't, like I was saying, it kind of, it makes me feel uncomfortable. Most of the time, I'm pushing into a very uncomfortable place that maybe I don't want to look at. It's forcing me to look.
This seems like an overarching connection between your work is showing something that is uncomfortable to the viewers in order to push us into understanding better the narratives that you're portraying. I'm wondering about the in-between. What role does ambiguity or the in-between play in engaging your viewers?
Well, I identify as non-binary. I neither feel masculine or inherently feminine, so a lot of my interest in queer and feminist theory came from understanding myself in societal construction of gender. So I am interested in in-betweens, movements, change, and flux, because it ties into my own understanding of transness in a sense of like this movement through time. So I am really interested in queer phenomenology and incorporeal bodies. And I really want the viewer to feel like the concept of man or woman is unstable, but focus on women or AFAB people, because it's my own experience. I can't really speak to what it is to be a man because I don't really know, and all I can speak to is my own personal experience. So a lot of my sculptures are me. They are physically my face. So it is kind of maybe a selfish thing to explore oneself, but I think that's what art is for. And then usually it opens it up so that other people can feel a kinship to your work, and so that they don't feel like they're alone. So a lot of what I'm really interested in queer theory, because it's a reclamation and it avoids categorization. That's what the in-between is. It's avoiding categorization. It's almost, as Legacy Russell kind of talks about, the glitch body as not being categorized, and it's something odd and strange, eccentric. It's really deviating from the expected or the norm in society. So one thing that I really like about queer theory and queerness is that it's not all about your sexuality, it doesn't play out in monolithic ways. It's really open and kind of talks about the instability. Life and gender, sexuality is very much in flux. A lot of my work is morphing, changing into something new, undefinable. A lot of my work is an intense searching, as I've been talking about, I guess, for something that can't ever be defined. Like, we can never put everything in a box. It's so ubiquitous and in motion and fluid that it makes it so that all futures are possible, so that it's not bound to a single ness or singularity. It's process, change. A lot of my work is vulnerable. Makes it kind of hard to talk about because it comes from such a vulnerable internal place that it's difficult to come to terms with sometimes.
How do you reconcile that, the vulnerability of putting your internal thoughts and processes out into the world?
Well, I think being vulnerable is a first step in kind of claiming your power. I think a lot of people have to heal. It's a moment of healing for me anyway. It's like I use the vulnerability and like this growth in my work and like trying to think about what I'm saying or what I'm doing, how I'm depicting bodies in space. And I think that's where, through the vulnerability, the power happens in the work. That like a lot of the works are very strong and they're not vulnerable. they're very imposing, which is what I want them to be, but they come from intense vulnerability as a maker.
In what ways do you think the grotesque empowers the representation of women in your sculptures?
Well, mainly the grotesque is used to kind of talk about the history of the nude in art, but the grotesque is a vehicle to explore repression, to explore this repression and this like anger, volatile energy from being repressed your whole life. It kind of comes out in a very unpredictable kind of way. So the uncanny, the grotesque is a way to kind of explore those repression. And also thinking about the figure, it kind of talks about past traditions that were traditionally upheld in both, and then it's like queering it so that you can be aware of the past and how we're reflecting in the future. For me, the grotesque is something that is a reclamation of power, because you can't look away from something that is unheimlich, the unheimlich body. It's always been something that I'm trying to unpack. Why am I attracted to darker, more difficult work, like, let's say, Francis Bacon or Jenny Saville? Because I think it's getting at an existential kind of question of who we are and like disturbing the viewer out of the lobotomized worldview of television. This reality, in a way, it kind of can be used to explore a lot of subversive potential.
Stephanie, the first time that we spoke, what I felt was a very enlightening and robust conversation around the Canadian art scene. One of the topics that we spoke about was, why does it seem like Canadian artists need to go elsewhere in order to be recognized and respected in Canada? So I'm curious if you can talk to us a bit about what your perspective is around that.
One thing that I have noticed, I've left Canada, but it was also something I have always known, that as a Canadian artist, I had to leave to get educated somewhere else and then maybe be successful there. And then I would be maybe welcomed home. One thing that I was really struck by, like when I'm in Los Angeles or New York, they show mainly artists from that place. So a lot of art that is being shown in Los Angeles is mostly people from there. Whereas in Canada, I'm noticing that a lot of galleries want international artists. They don't really procure emerging artists as well. I do have some people are like, well, they offer grants and things like that. I think my work, because it's so out of the norm, it's very challenging. I seem to convince the Canadian government to give me money to do research. I found more acceptance in the United States for my art practice, and also valuing what I have to say about queer experience, AFAB experience, and also there's a lot more population in the United States. There's a lot more education. Universities that I could teach at. There's a lot more options for me to kind of grow my career in the United States right now. I would love to move back to Canada eventually. It's just has been a little bit of a challenge for me to kind of get started in Alberta in particular. I made the big leap and came to the US, and luckily I've been able to stay here through working really, really hard, but also having the opportunity to work in university level. And so that has kind of helped me maintain my own artistic practice through educating people, because then I don't have to worry about making artwork for an art market. I get to just make work that I really want to make, and then I don't have to worry about if it sells. It does kind of, my garage is full of art, and how do you still maintain? It's just, you have to have a storage unit as a sculptor, and it's kind of par for the course to have that kind of, you have to expect that kind of thing. And particularly where I am now, it's really rural, so there's a lot of cheap real estate, lots of space. I do find Canadian cities have become really expensive to live, and I know it's the same in the United States, obviously. That's why I've been kind of pushed to go more rural in the setting. But because of the New York State College of Ceramics reputation, I do get exposure to a larger art market and some opportunity. In general, in Canada, I haven't had a lot of luck, so I had to go somewhere else.
Do you have any thoughts around why there is that mindset within Canada for its own artists?
I'm not sure. I feel like they don't believe in their own talent in a way, that it needs to come from somewhere else to be validated, to then be considered good in the sphere in Canadian art market. And obviously, those tastes are different wherever you are in Canada. So Vancouver has a different aesthetic value than Calgary, and Toronto has a different aesthetic appeal to Halifax, you know what I mean? So I can't really say that there's a one kind of overarching view, but I do feel, let's use Toronto as an example. I look at a lot of galleries representation, who they represent, and a lot of the artists are American or from abroad. So I think Canadian galleries, institutions could foster a little bit more of progressive art within its own people, so that we don't have to go to another place. Another thing is just, I think in Canada, a lot of people are, middle class. A lot of people have grown up with safety nets. A lot of people have grown up with, maybe some art in their homes. But I think in general, America is a more capitalist culture. They have a bigger disparity between wealth gaps, and they do have collectors that really collect art. So I don't think that that's really fair comparison of the Canadian art market. I think, if more people cultivated at the middle class level, that people found value in art and found value in collecting work, I think we could build something really great in Canada. And, coming from Canada, it was a bit of a culture shock of living in the United States, almost on every level. I don't know why my work in the US I think there's just more artists working within the vein that I'm working with in the United States versus in Canada. There's not a lot of grotesque body sculpture or hybrid body work going on there. I do feel like my work kind of fits more I'm hoping in New York. That's why I made the move to New York State, so that I would have more opportunity to show in New York City. I also really enjoyed Los Angeles, living there, having the access to culture all the time, always shows going on. And they're very, in Los Angeles, it was very inclusive. I was getting asked to be in shows almost every week, and it's the art community seemed very lifting each other up more so. And I don't know what it'll be like in New York City. I've only lived here for a year and a half, so I've been a little nervous to try to get shows in New York. I don't know. It's just a sense of am I good enough? You know what I mean? It's maybe I'm self-sabotaging because I'm too shy a lot of the time. I'm working through that imposter syndrome of not feeling good enough.
In talking about how when you've moved to the US, you've felt like your art maybe fits that environment. Do you feel that it's like an attitude of acceptance? The US has a greater acceptance with, something like your art versus Canada?
I do think that the Canadian art scene is a little bit conservative. It can be conservative in its tastes, but I do feel like the US has a little bit more, there's just more population, so there's more people that identify with me and can like relate to me, or maybe just outwardly relate to me. So I do feel like I might have more acceptance in the United States just because of, I think, visibility within the culture here is greater.
Stephanie, if we can shift topics a bit, I'm curious to hear about your experience participating in Kindred Visions. And then if you can tell us what viewers can expect with your upcoming show at the University of Iowa.
Yeah, I was in a group show at Eduardo Secchi's gallery in Florence. It was called Kindred Visions. It was curated by Maria Roos-Bojan, is an Amsterdam artist or curator, and they had a pretty big lineup of international artists from all over the world, kind of working within the vein that I'm working within, morphing, merging movement in a way of relocating that in culture. The works that I had in that show were mainly smaller pieces. I had two heads, one bronze and one glass head. Again, I was working with mold-blown glass, mirrored, again, working with the mirror. And these were like my first works that I had done in glass and bronze. And I did those at University of Washington in 2022. So it was really great to have them on an international stage. New work that I'm going to be showing at University of Iowa is curated by Hayward. They're going to be doing a press journal on the work. So they're going to have a piece of art, and then they're going to have writers, poets kind of comment on the work. They're going to describe the works of art in vivid detail. So I'm really interested to see what that yields, because everybody sees something different in my work, and I'm really interested to how other people relate to it and see it. And I think that's one thing I like about my work, is that it can't really be pinned down. So a lot of people, it's like really open to interpretation.
What has been the most rewarding aspect of sharing your work in these diverse artistic landscapes?
Yeah, because one is a commercial, like more commercial gallery. And usually the show in Florence was really new for me. I don't have a lot of commercial gallery kind of settings, so that was really lovely for me to see my work in that kind of setting, not just in clay kind of world, I guess, because ceramics can be still seen as a marginalized material, not seen as prestigious as other materials, which I obviously don't agree with, but yeah, I do see like clay more and more in like the big art fairs and in the major galleries. So that's encouraging to see. A lot of my work has been exhibited in museums and in kind of more university academic settings, as it's not really concentrated on the sale of work. It's more concentrated on conceptual ideas and like inspiring students.
Do you hope for the future of your practice?
I guess I am tying more into the celestial, like otherworldly, kind of pushing my work further into abstraction. But my goals would be to eventually have my own studio, that I'm no longer having to rely on the academic setting to fire my work, because just what the NYSCC, the university at Alfred, they have like multi-million-dollar facilities that I couldn't do any other way. Like these kilns are probably worth like $500,000 just to have them. So it's a very like privileged situation that I'm in, that I have access to the facilities. Anything I ever want to like make, I could do here. So that's for me really exciting. Alfred University is really into multidisciplinary engagements, so I could have a class in experimental film and video and mixed with ceramic sculpture. So it's like it really values that exchange, and that's why it really brought me here. I guess on like that, I think you could dive really deep into material here too. So I'm definitely a ceramics clay nerd and get to geek out on material science stuff with my colleagues and the grad students. So that's really fun. And I think for the future, I'd love to like build my own studio and kind of have my own space to work instead of always being on display, which I feel like I have been since graduating my master's. It's kind of like what you have to do to be in the academic university spheres, being very community oriented, sharing knowledge, which I love doing that, always trying to share what I know with students and beyond. So it would be nice to have my own space in the future, which is something that I'm kind of looking forward to, and hopefully I can do in the next 5 years or so.
Stephanie, where can our listeners find your work?
I have some work up in the Cohen Gallery here in Alfred, New York. But if you're not in upstate New York, you can find me at stephaniehaynes.net. And also my Instagram handle is stephanie.haynes. Thank you so much for having me on your show. It meant a lot.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Stephanie. And we look forward to seeing what's next for you. Thank you for joining us on Artbeat, where the stories of Canadian art come to life. Follow us on Instagram at Artbeat Podcast for exclusive content and previews of what's to come. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to stay updated with our journey through the world of Canadian art. Enjoyed the episode? Leave a review or recommend us to a fellow art enthusiast. Together, let's keep the conversation going and deepen our connection to the diverse world of Canadian art. See you next time.